Gavin is an environmental engineer based at Monash University in Melbourne. He's also the chairperson of the Minerals Policy Institute and has had 20 years involvement in the anti-nuclear movement in Australia and is a specialist at looking at issues around mining. So thanks for making the effort to be here.
Okay. Thanks, Beth. I've got a bunch of things I want to try and get through tonight, and I know I'm not going to get through everything. But first of all, I want to answer that question around the salt. I think we all know if you take an acid and an alkali and you add them together, you get the salt plus water. Right? So if you're importing 350,000 tonnes per year of chemicals, which is basically alkalis and acids, 20 times 350,000 is 7 million. That's a very crude way of explaining it, but that's effectively what's happening. So part of the other things that gets entrained into the salt comes from what they bleach out of the ore and so on as well. But that's if you go through the amount that's coming in, both the rock, the ore that they're processing, the water and the chemicals, you sort of get these numbers. So hopefully that answers the question. So, but in terms of my background, I'm actually biased, and I'm actually quite proud to say that. My sustainability model is actually putting the environment first. Then we have community within that, and then within our community we have an economy. Right, now I say that very clearly because I think that's actually really what sustainability is all about. Right, so in that sense I don't put jobs first, although jobs are important, and so is the economy and other things. But in that sense, if we have no environment, we have no community, and without a community we basically don't have an economy anyway. So that's my values, that's the way I approach things. So when I look at things, I tend to start from that point of view. It's like maximum protection. I look at the environmental risks very seriously. Now, I remember back in February 2011, one of my good friends and colleagues that I collaborate a lot with through Monash, is pro-nuclear in the context of climate change. And we're talking, he's saying, why are you still opposed to uranium mining? Why are you still opposed to nuclear power? Right, and he said, well, we're all waiting for the next big accident. Right. And he knows I don't just make stuff up as much as my critics like to think I do. I have my evidence base. I watch what's going on out there and I think for myself. I don't just accept propaganda. I don't just accept one version of a paper or an issue. I look, I try and find all sides of the story and I do my best to aggregate what is science, what is values. And to me, the greatest reason to oppose nuclear power is not actually the safety of nuclear power itself. It's actually the bombs. Right. And there are other arguments that you can get to in terms of managing high-level waste, reactor safety compared to renewables. Yeah, you can get into all of that. But primarily, it's a very moral position. Bombs are fundamentally wrong. In the same sense that we've made that argument around slavery, around landmines, and a whole bunch of other technologies, asbestos, for example. Right. So in that way, when I'm looking at this, and of course, 3 weeks after that conversation, Fukushima happened. Right. Now, for 6 months, and I sit on one of the uranium committees up in Darwin for the environmental movement to actually, look at the issues up, say, the Ranger uranium mine. Right. So in that way, when you look at something like Fukushima, how many people know where the uranium came from that actually supplied that? It was Australia. Right. That's not something I wear as a badge of pride. So in that way, the reason why I was saying we're all waiting for the next big accident is because when you're looking at the evidence, what's actually going on in different parts of the world, you're getting near misses in Sweden, of course, which gave us Volvo and led to the safety revolution in cars. You're looking at accidents and near misses in America and all sorts of things. You cannot keep playing Russian roulette and pretend you're going to always be safe, right? And you only have to talk to the safety culture in groups like Qantas or the petroleum industry and a whole bunch of different areas where we are managing very risky things on a very daily basis, right? And some things we can get it right. I still fly Qantas. I'm still very proud to fly Qantas because they're safe, right? Doesn't mean it's zero risk. Right. So when you're looking at a lot of these sorts of projects, and I think what we're trying to understand when we're dealing with a lot of technologies these days is actually, well, what are the risks? And often we haven't understood what those long-term risks are. Whether it's high-level nuclear waste, whether it's nuclear weapons, whether it's acid mine drainage leaking out of old coal mines in the Hunter, acid mine drainage going down streams in places like South Africa, going straight into World Heritage areas from 125 years of gold mining. Right? So all of this sort of stuff is out there. So I get out there, I visit these sites, I see what's going on, and that's how I learn. And I also go out and make sure I visit communities because that's how I also learn. So I don't want to stand up here tonight and try and say that this project should or shouldn't go ahead because that's actually not my choice. Right? That's communities here. Right? Now, if you're looking at rare earths and zirconia and so on, it's a complex story. It's actually, there's a lot of facts and figures behind that and issues. Some we're still learning. If we're looking at a history of a lot of different materials that we've used, we often don't understand their long-term risks, whether that's health risks and things like that. So, and rare earths fit into that category. You know, we start using them before we really understand their long-term toxicity, and not to try and say that therefore they are really toxic. I don't, you know, there's no evidence to suggest they are, right? But again, this is the sort of attitude I think we really should be saying. If we're looking at pharmaceuticals, for example, we go through an enormous amount of test work, from lab scale, small scale trials to large scale trials of thousands and thousands of people. Then the evidence is looked at and people go, yes, that's safe, the benefits of that drug outweigh the potential side effects to say maybe a small fraction of people. And overall we say there's a public good case to say that drug is safe. Right? So when we're looking at power, we're looking at a whole bunch of things, we can make that argument. Right? We don't really do that very well with mining. As much as we have environmental assessment processes, and I teach my engineering students that want us to actually do those documents and actually say, well, we need good baseline studies, we need good actual project descriptions so we understand what's really happening, what the risks are and everything else. So, but we don't come back and actually say, well, how accurate were those predictions? And a whole range of things we do with mining. So when it comes to rare earths, we've never really done it before, so we don't really have a good understanding of that. Now, there's a bunch of qualifiers, but primarily when we're looking at rare earths, yes, they are needed. You know, you can look at, just look at it here. The fact that it's this small is partly, and in large part actually, due to rare earths. There's a whole bunch of other metals in there as well. Where that was, thank you. So they're certainly needed. They make help wind turbines more powerful, all sorts of things, but there's also other drivers such as military technology, which of course is part of that discussion around why people are so concerned about where their supply is coming from, because if America's reliant on China for their military resources, you can see why America gets really worried about that. And whether that's fair enough or not is there's a big debate there. But when we're talking about rare earths, we are talking about a whole group of elements, about 15 elements, and we often chuck yttrium and scandium in that same group. But wherever we find rare earths, we always find uranium, we always find thorium. The question is how much. Right? Sometimes, like the project here, you find zirconium, hafnium, tantalum, sometimes niobium. You find these other elements that are in the same ore body. And so effectively a project like this is mining almost a quarter of the periodic table. Whether they're all economic to sell or not is another issue. But my simple approach to that is actually, well, sure, there is a demand and there's a realistic need for rare earths for good technologies, as long as we can make sure we manage the mines properly. Right? Now, unfortunately, we don't really have a good example of that worldwide. You could go through a mountain pass in the US, you could go through the mines in China. My PhD student Zihan is here, and he's will tell you a lot about some of the issues in China. And China's got a lot of pollution problems as well. So rare earths, the role in renewable energy technologies, this story is very real, right? But we are, in reality, mining radioactive ore bodies, and we cannot avoid that. There is uranium and thorium at sort of economic, sub-economic grades at Tungai. I'm really glad I worked out how that's pronounced. I was always, curious about that. So thank you. So in that sense, it's certainly very high in thorium as well. And based on the numbers, typical average soils around the world will have around 10 to 12. I find it curious that Dubbo's half that. It's normally you see companies do it the other way around, but anyway. If you're looking at the average concentration in the ore body there, it's around about 480. Right, so it's significantly elevated, something like 40-odd times, 50-odd times higher in thorium, and uranium you're going from around about 3 milligrams per kilogram or parts per million up to around about 140. So if you're looking at normal uranium mines around the world, they would start at around about 200 parts per million, go anywhere up to 3,000 or 5,000. And so there's some that are higher grade than that, there's some that are even lower grade than Dubbo here as well. Right, but that's the only product they're mining. But for here, I think from a community point of view, an environmental point of view, sure, they're processing that, and that means the ore is radioactive. There's issues there that have to be dealt with. Most uranium mines don't have thorium. As much as people might like to try and pretend otherwise, but very, very few uranium deposits around the world have elevated thorium. Yeah, the odd one does, like Elliott Lake in Canada, but rare earth deposits typically do. And often the concentrations of thorium are quite enriched. Right? So one of the big issues that why there's been so much concern about rare earths is simply because of the fact you've got uranium and thorium in there. And if you're not managing those wastes properly, you have very significant risks around pollution problems and workers' problems. Right? Now, one of the things that I think, certainly I've been following this issue for many years, and together with my colleague Robin Chappell, who's one of the Greens for the Upper House in Western Australia, has been working on rare earths and the issues of rare earths for several years, long before I think other people have realised what was going on. But if you're looking at the Mount Weld project in Western Australia, they're mining an ore that has around 750 parts per million thorium in it. Actually much lower in uranium, around about 28 or 30, I think, from memory. Right, so there the balance is very different. But one of the reasons why the community in Malaysia has been so vocal in opposing the refinery project in Kuantan is not because it's just an Australian company getting a very generous tax deal. There's other words you could use for that, but I am in public. But not just because of that, but because the community in Malaysia, under a dictatorship, actually shut down a polluting rare earths refinery. What was operated by Mitsubishi, it was called the Asian Rare Earths Refinery. It caused significant problems. They dumped the residues in local farmers' fields. They used some of the residues to make road products out of, or things like that. They dumped liquid waste straight down the rivers. All the stuff that these days we would say is not exactly very good management. Right? It's not that we don't know how to do it, sure. From an engineering point of view, I could go through everything. And sort of Matt and I were talking about that this afternoon when we actually went down to Toongai and just had a quick look around. But so in that way, there's a lot of engineering solutions can be dealt with this. But elevated cancer rates, problems with children, all of these health issues were very real, and that led the community under a dictatorship in Malaysia to actually get a big project shut down. Right? And so when you're coming in and promising effectively to do what looks to them to be the same thing, without any of the other engineering, the assessment process was very, very deficient, I would certainly argue. And so it hasn't dealt with all of these concerns properly. It doesn't have the data, it doesn't have the evidence, and certainly the level of engineering that's gone into that, there's been a lot of issues in that plant and getting it started up. Right? So when you're hearing some of these stories around rare earths, sure, they're real. The issues around the environmental impacts are real, and a lot of them are revolving around the fact that there is uranium and thorium in it. And that doesn't mean because they're being mined, and to me it seems nonsensical to say that you can mine an ore body that's got 140 parts per million uranium, which in some parts of the world is an economic mine just for uranium alone, and you're not mining uranium. Now sure, it's hard for a company to say they're going to be doing something that's effectively illegal. That would be, would raise issues in some ways with either their stock exchange listing or whatever. But to say they're not even